Hey, what's going on, class? This is Instructor Reader, and this PowerPoint is going to be all about the writing process. And the writing process is an awesome topic. I love to teach this topic because it gives students a little bit of a glimpse at the method of the madness of writing. So imagine a math student trying to solve an equation, but they don't know the formulas that underlie the mathematical principles. It would be impossible to do any sort of math if you didn't know things like the Pythagorean theorem, right? And the writing process is the same way for making essays, right? It's very, very difficult to write high-quality papers at the college level without some sort of formula, without some sort of systematic approach. And that's what this video is all about. It's systematizing the writing process. And it's something that you will find very helpful if you haven't already done this in your academic career. So there's generally 5 accepted stages of the writing process. Now there's a bunch of different theories. Some of them might be a 2-step process. Some of them might be a 7 or a 10-step process. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, these 5 steps right here are going to help you write better papers. Stage 1 is the preliminary writing and the preliminary thinking phase. You can think of this as the brainstorming phase, the idea generation phase, and there's so many techniques that you can use to help you with pre-writing, preliminary thinking, and a lot of it involves asking questions, being curious, writing down your observations in the real world, and then trying to connect those observations with a research, which is going to be your second stage of the writing process. So stage 1, you gather ideas. Stage 2, you research those ideas. You look for the evidence, right? You look for the facts, the statistics, some of the things that may prove or disprove some of the things that you've observed, or some of your questions might have been answered during the research phase. And stage 3 is the thesis statement and the outlining. Thesis statement might be a new word for you, or a new phrase rather. And it might be intimidating at first glance, but really it's not too bad. And we're going to cover more on all of these stages throughout the course, and we're going to go into each one very deliberately. We're going to go into each one with a lot more detail. But a thesis statement is really just the most important concept to the writing process. And it's very surprising to me when college students come into my courses and they don't know what a thesis statement is. And really, it's just a proclamation of where you stand regarding the topic that you're writing about, and then maybe some of the reasons why. And maybe that doesn't make sense right now, but throughout this course, pay close attention to that idea of a thesis statement. It's a central idea that everything is written about, and it's expressed in a singular sentence. And typically, you're going to couple that with an outline, which is basically a rough sketch of what your essay is going to be. And everyone does their outlines a little differently, but most people just use bullet points. You can think of it as a kind of like a pirate map, right? If I was going to make some sort of analogy or a metaphor for a thesis statement and an outline, your thesis statement would be like a compass, right? And it would be north on a compass. Everything you write about before it leads up to it. And everything you write after your thesis statement goes back to it. But an outline's a little different. An outline's like a pirate map because it shows you very concisely how to go from point A to point B. So an outline, it's going to say, I'm going to talk about this in my introduction. Then it's going to be, I'm going to talk about this in body paragraph 1. And these are going to be some of my supporting ideas in body paragraph 1. And then you'll talk about paragraph 3 and your conclusion. and you basically outline from point A to point B all the way down what you're going to write about. And this all takes place, all of this takes place before you even start writing your paper. And that's the important thing that you need to take away from this video. If nothing else, this more than half of the writing process is planning. It's thinking, it's creating questions, it's researching those questions, finding the facts and the statistics, putting them together in a logical sequence, and that's all before you even write the first word of your introduction. And that's what's going to set you up for success. Because if you, let's say you go try to build a house, right? But you don't have a blueprint, it's not going to be a very good house. And this is basically your blueprint, right? This is your blueprint. This is gathering everything that you need. This is saying, oh, I kind of want to build my house in this particular location. And maybe these are some of the hazards I got to look out for. Maybe I need to do some more research on it. And then you get to that phase. Okay, so I found this manufacturer that can build my house, and they can do it for this price. And these are the building codes that I'm going to need, and here's all the resources I'm going to need, and this is the estimated timeline, right? And then you get to the thesis statement and outlining. This is when you say, okay, I'm putting a new house here in this location, and it's going to have all the building permits. We're going to finally put it into action. This is the game plan from point A to point B. So from the initial groundwork to completion of the house. And now that all happens before the first little piece of foundation is even laid for that house, right? And this should be the easy part then, right? So if you have all the planning done already, and you've put in that time, you put in that effort, you'll be surprised how easy it is to write your paper, especially if you write a very detailed outline. And then the last stage, the final stage, proofreading, editing, revising, kind of self-explanatory. There's some techniques that we can go into, but we'll cover those later in the course. Now, the prevalence of audience analysis, super important, and that's why I put this all-seeing eye up here. This is something that you're always going to want to keep in mind whenever you write your papers, right? So imagine that we continue on with this house analogy, right? So instead of building this house for yourself, let's say it was a client, right? And your client said, I want vaulted ceilings in this house, and I wanted a lakefront view, and I want 2 stories, but I want to make sure that the staircase is handicap accessible. Okay, so we got this particular wants and needs of this audience. So we have to make sure that we keep that in mind when we're in that planning phase, right? When we're doing our idea searching and we do our researching, and when we create that outline, we want to keep an idea of our audience in mind at all times. Who are we making this argument for? Who are we trying to communicate to? Because there's always somebody we're trying to communicate to. What's the purpose? And that's going to have a huge effect on the way and the style that you write your papers, and some of the information that you might omit or information you might include. So that's super important, and that's an aspect of the writing process that should be steady throughout the whole process. And here we're going to talk about some recursive loops and milestones, right? And you notice I put this orange bracket here and this orange one here, and you have this caution sign here. You know, what does all of this mean, right? So if we're going through this planning phase, right? And let's stick with the house analogy because I've used it enough. We're going to roll with it. So we've planned this house, we've done all the research, right? And then we finally get to the stage where we're saying, okay, this is the plan, here's our map, here's our blueprint, everything's together, and we say, hey, contractor, this is our work. So we can bounce between stage 1 and stage 2 as many times as we need to. It's a loop. We can go back from idea generation and questioning to research, and then we say, I got some more questions, and we go back. We can keep going back and forth between these. But once we get to the thesis statement and the outline, that's, hey, caution, right? Caution symbol. That means it's time to stop and say, hey, this is our plan. We're going to follow through with it. Now, when you start to build that house, there's no going back, right? So once you start writing your paper, once you start proofreading, editing, and revising your paper, you don't go back across this orange line. You never go back across the orange line. Before you cross it, you can continue going back and forth. Once you cross it, that's it. Now it's time to commit to your vision, right? Otherwise, what you're going to have is a house that isn't built well. You have parts that are partially done and parts that are partially undone, and it just becomes a mess, right? So keep that in mind. You have 2 recursive loops. You have stage 1 and stage 2. As many times as you want. You go back and forth, back and forth. Stage 3 is your milestone. That's when you commit. Once you have a solid thesis statement and an outline, that's your milestone, that's your green light to say, okay, time for stage 4. And when you're at stage 4 and 5, when you're writing, you can proofread and edit and revise and go back and forth between as many times as you want until you get the finished product that you need for your audience. So I hope that made sense to you guys. I tried to make it as visual as possible so you could see kind of where the breaks are, what stages kind of have their loops, and the idea of not going back across once you get to a certain stage.